Yeah, without question. I mean, part of what I'm excited about tonight too, like you mentioned, the depth, like BI's out as well with concussion, or in concussion protocol. So hopefully he's able to get back from that, especially too, because like he has looked incredible. Like he's looked so good. Herb Jones is out tonight as well. I do not remember what he's out for. But that means Trey Murphy the third season, and he's looked really good to start the year too. Like I know you and I were gushing about him before we got on the pod, but this whole team in general. One thing I wanted to ask you: how have you felt about the defense? Because I feel like I've deferred with how some people felt about the defense coming into the season. I just was not worried about the defense to the extent that I think it's been made out to be. I think as a playoff thing, you can be more worried about it, but for the regular season, I mean, Willie Green put together a really good team scheme last year. They executed it. They definitely have, like, especially with the starting lineup, they can have some personnel questions, but with what they can do throughout the game, mixing and matching things lineup wise, I just don't worry about it that much considering what their principles are and how well they play them. So where are you at with that right now?
I'm probably a bit more worried than
Okay.
you are, I think. Zion looks Zion looks a bit better in terms of like reading and reacting to what's happening on the court
Mhm.
than he did his first couple of years. I still think that like the closeouts are heavy and it's just kind of easy to attack him.
Yeah.
And that ends up getting the team into rotation and then they're scrambling and that can be a little bit complicated. I think that you kind of look at the way this team is constructed, they're going to play Zion a lot with Jonas. And when you're having like, you're playing a floor spacer on Zion, you're just going to have to go and outscore that guy on the opposite end. I think I really liked the way that the Pelicans came back in the fourth quarter against the Jazz, but I also think that the Jazz, you know, kind of brought up an idea of how difficult it could be for this team to guard in space
Mhm.
on a consistent basis with Jonas, with Zion in the game. And Jonas like only played 24 minutes. Like they did a lot of like the Larry Nance, like playing small minutes in that game. And I think that was a really smart idea. Um, but I get, I, it's going to be a process, I think, throughout the year. And I think that early in the season, it's probably going to be a lot of high scoring games for the Pelicans. The thing is that like Jonas is one of the 5 or 6, best offensive centers in the NBA, in my opinion. He's just able to bludgeon you at the rim so
Mhm.
consistently, as well as playing pick and roll. Zion is obviously one of the 10 best players offensively. As you mentioned, Brandon Ingram looks phenomenal. And I know that, he only played 11 minutes in that last game against the Jazz. I think they win that game against the Jazz if he plays a full game.
Definitely.
Um, and then CJ McCollum looks phenomenal as well. So, like, the offense is going to be great. Like all of my previous concerns about spacing, anything like that, the offense is going to be phenomenal because Trey Murphy, as you mentioned, looks great. Herb Jones has gotten off to a slow start, but like you have to hope that he can bring some of the defensive, you know, ability and ability to read the game and play at a high level off the ball and get deflections and create transition opportunities. But in terms of the defense, I have more concerns, I think, than you do, especially early. And they're going to have to figure out how to account for the fact. And this is something we're going to talk about the Timberwolves later, even to a greater extent. They're going to have to figure out what to do when teams play a spacer on like that is guarding Zion and that Zion is guarding. And he is forced into a heavy closeout situation. Because the other thing with Zion is he has this weird tendency to like kind of sink pretty heavily into the paint because he likes to try and block shots.
Mhm.
And then it leads to heavier closeouts where he has to like really run out, it feels like. They need to like really get him locked in to like staying with those shooters, I think, from time to time. But anytime teams run him off of actions, I think it gets even a little bit harder for him. And on top of it, another guy that Zion is so good that the numbers just look amazing, but also, a guy that is probably working his way back into game shape to some extent in the NBA.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. And even like I thought in the first two games he looked a lot better on the perimeter defensively, but totally agree. Like in that Jazz game, like he looked just a lot more slow footed. Especially on like you mentioned on the closeouts, like he's kind of doing that hop thing, which is
Yeah.
like always a little bit awkward to see. Um, I don't know. I
And
just
here's the
maybe
thing, like
okay.
the two teams they played early, like Brooklyn didn't really put a ton of pressure on him
Mhm.
because they just have guys that you kind of hide him on. And then the Hornets, God love the Hornets right now. They're working hard, but PJ Washington is like a pretty easy guard for him because PJ doesn't run off of like a crazy number of off ball actions, right? So when you put him in total space like Utah can, it gets more complicated. And I think that's why, like, if I was a Pelicans fan, I would have a little bit of concern moving into the playoffs with this roster. But that's not the playoffs. I think this team's going to win 50 games at the end of the day.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, transitioning to the offense though, and kind of a blend of the two, talking about the Utah game. Walker Kessler was really good in that game, man. Like he wasn't
Yeah.
perfect, like he's a rookie, but he like absolutely stonewalled Zion and JV a couple of times. The rim protection is overall been really impressive from him. Just want to give him a quick shout out. But um, one of the things that I've most enjoyed about this Pels team is that it hasn't really felt my turn, your turn at all. Like it really feels
Yeah.
like they've blended all of what they can do together. And I think to me, like that's one of the things I look for the most to start the season from teams. Like having, okay, are you able to get your best players working in actions that get the most out of their combined gravity? I think I look at this team and so often like they're able to get the most out of having BI and CJ and Zion and JV out at the same time. And I actually think in some ways like Willie almost
And
leans too much
yeah.
into his lineup versatility. Like I
And,
think
and
that
this is
they're
not an easy problem to solve either.
yeah.
Like this is a complicated group to make work together. And Willie Green looks great doing it right now.
Yeah. Yeah, no, exactly. I think almost even sometimes like he leans too much into having lineup versatility. Like it's good to have it, but like I sometimes like he's willing to just have like just Zion out there or just BI out there. And I'm like, no, man, I think I want to see him having more of like at least two of each of the big four out there.
Yeah.
But overall, like, yeah, I mean, I'm just so impressed with this offense because what Zion does, like, um, I think the best way to put it is almost like buffering what the margin for error is for some of the role players on the roster. It's what makes it easier to play a guy like Herb. In my not that Herb is bad. Like I think with what the offense started out as, but just more in terms of talking about like I think Najee Marshall's a better example because like Najee had a really good rookie year, obviously coming in as a unsigned guy or two way. I can't remember.
He
Um,
was a two-way. Yeah.
yeah, and then but then last year Najee really struggled. And I think part of it, a large part of it was I mean, granted, he's not a great shooter. He's sometimes hesitant from outside, but he's a good driver, especially off second side actions, continuing play. When you don't have Zion out there and you don't have that level of gravity, like obviously BI and CJ have gravity, but Zion is, I mean, he's different. Like when you have somebody who can really impact the defense like that, you just give that much more margin for error. And I think you can extract more of the positive things that a Najee Marshall can bring to the team without being quite as hindered by some of the spacing issues. And I mean, just overall, I think that the ability that this team has to not be stagnant offensively, even without not always having like the greatest shooting personnel, is really encouraging. And like Jose Alvarado's looked good from deep too. Again, early, but like he's hitting threes off ghost screens now. Like that's not stuff that I was very accustomed to him doing last year. I don't know that's going to continue, but again, like I think overall, I'm just really enticed by what this team is doing offensively.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting. I think the thing that I underrated, not underrated, but I think I forgot maybe to like 10% of an extent is Zion's gravity is immense. Like you can't sink back on him really on defense. Like if you don't get early contact on him and he has the ball, you are fucked. Like if you don't get him early, he just gets downhill so fast that it's over. Like
Mhm.
if he's a ball handler and you play like drop coverage against him, he is going to try and go through you. And most of the time he's going to be successful because he's the strongest, most explosive player in the NBA. You're right. Walker Kessler did like a pretty good job against it. But my guess is the next time the Utah Jazz play the New Orleans Pelicans, that's probably not going to go as well for Walker Kessler because the other thing that Zion does is he really does a great job of adjusting um, to the way rim protectors play him after a certain point.
Yep.
And it's just really, really hard, I think, to account for, everyone talks about no shooting, no shooting, Zion can't shoot, etc. But he actually kind of has to get treated like a shooter in the way that you have to guard him like relatively tightly. Otherwise, it's over and it's just kind of curtains. Like if he's in a pick and roll, you can't drop like 8 feet off of him like you can someone like Herb Jones. If you do, he's getting ahead of steam and he's going to beat you to the spot.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I mean, like when you have him bringing the ball up in transition too, like one of the things I love, like this is the nerd out on, but like I love diversification of ball handlers. Like having part of like what I loved about the Bulls last year was how much they leaned into Ayo Dosunmu bringing the ball up.
Yeah.
Because again, like you have a guy who not really a point guard, he was more of a combo coming out of Illinois, but he has like that real ability to okay, I can generate a quick paint touch because of this the head of steam I can generate in transition. Obviously Zion different, but again, like you make it okay. Well, we're having our primary defenders probably on Brandon Ingram because Brandon Ingram is a 6'8" wing scorer who can pass the shit out of the ball too. Same thing with CJ. Like,
Right.
but again, like you have to pick up Zion early, otherwise that's not just paint touch, like that's paint destruction. But
Yeah.
there's just the overall roster construction. It's so funky, but it's so fun too. And like
Yeah.
we haven't even talked about TM3 that much. Like he's making strides, man. Like not that I think
He's
he's gonna be
great.
most improved this year, but he's a little bit more flexible. Like his screen navigation looks better on defense. It wasn't perfect, but like he snaked the dribble and took a floater on offense. I'm like, I didn't expect him to do that this early, B just in general. And the shooting, like he's going to shoot everything and shoot it well. And his second jump too, I continue to be really impressed with. Like his rebounding has been nuts. Like as good as Zion's second jump is, like the way that Trey attacks the glass, like I tweeted this out the other day. He's gonna give. I mean, Greg Brown's probably not gonna play enough, but like that's why I make it per 75. Per 75 minutes, I'm not sure anybody's gonna jump more in the NBA this year than Trey Murphy the third. Like he's gonna be up there. So yeah, I mean, this whole roster, man, it's fun.
I love it. I love this roster so much. I was worried about how it all would fit, but I love all of the individual players on it. I have fewer concerns about how it's all going to fit. I think they're going to win 50 games. Like I said, I think this
Yep.
is going to be an awesome team. Yeah, I love Trey Murphy. I got so much shit from Pelicans fans ranking Trey Murphy ahead of Herb Jones in the redraft I did. Trey Murphy's a stud, man. Here's the thing about Trey Murphy that I think people like don't understand. Trey Murphy, like up until 4 or 5 years ago, was like 6'3", and then had like an enormous growth spurt where like his body elongated. And like I think that he still like might be growing a little bit. Because I think he's listed now at like 6'10" or something like that. And I think he was like 6'8", 6'9" at Virginia. And like he looks like an inch taller or so than he was at Virginia. And I think that to an extent, he is still figuring out how to use his body a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And once he figures that out, and once his body fills out after it's like elongated over the last 5 years, his body's going to get wider at some point as opposed to going upward. And it's going to be really hard to deal with him. It's going to be really, really hard to deal with him on both ends.